Welcome to Learnlyte. My name is Theodore. Today we're going to talk about variables. So what are variables? Well, variables are a powerful tool that we programmers can use. What it basically allows us to do is to basically assign values to a name. So what does that mean? Well, take for example the value of pi. The value of pi we know to be is 3.14159, I believe. So take for example this value. If we wanted the value of pi every time we needed it in our program, we'd have to write out this long number. But what variable allows us to do is to take this value and assign it to a name that we can later reference. So what do I mean by that? So let's create a variable. So to create a variable, we first begin with the name, which I'm going to call pi. Then we use the equal sign or the assignment operator to assign the value of 3.14159. So what this does is takes the value of 3.14 and assigns it to the name pi. So whenever we need that value now, all we have to do is reference the name pi, and just like that, we have the value. So this is very powerful. And the beauty about variables is that we can store any value inside of them. So in the next example, let's say I'm going to create a variable called fruit. And inside this variable, I'm going to store the value apples. So as I mentioned before, I first begin with the name. Then we use the assignment operator, which is the equal sign, followed by the value that we want to store in it. We hit enter. And then whenever I want the value apples, I can simply reference it by using the name fruit. And in this example, I'm going to have a variable called time. I'm going to assign the value of 60 to it. I'm going to create another variable called condition. And I'm going to assign a value of true to it. And there we go. Whenever we want the value true, we can simply reference it by the name condition. And the same can be set for 60. I can simply reference it by the name time. And the beauty about variables, since we can store anything in variables, the type of the variable is also the same as the type of the value being stored in it. So what does that mean? If I were to use the Python built-in function type and pass the value of pi into it, I will get a type float because the value being stored in pi is a float. And similarly for fruit, the value being stored in fruit is a string, so the type of fruit, the type that fruit belongs to, would be of class string. So as you can see, variables are very powerful. So I hope you understand. If you don't understand, one way I like to think of variables is that I like to think of them as boxes. So let's say we have this box right here. So I have this box, and I'm going to call this box pi. And the value that I'm going to store in pi is 3.14 some other numbers. That is equivalent to what we had before, where we had pi and we had it equal to the value 3.14, right? And in the next example, we did another variable. So we're going to have another box here, and this box here name was fruit, and the value we had placed in it was apples. And that's similarly to what we had here, fruit equal apples. So that's the way I like to think of variables. I like to think of them as boxes that we give name and that we can put a value in. So whenever we need the value, we can simply just reference them by their name, such as fruit and pi. But one thing to bear in mind when creating variables is that there are certain restrictions that are put on the name. For example, of a valid variable name is pi. That's a valid variable name. But we cannot use Python keywords such as lambda. So lambda cannot be a variable name because that is a Python keyword. Similarly, variable names cannot begin with numbers. So 1, 2, 3, Monday, this is not a valid variable name because variables cannot begin with numbers, but they do, however, can contain numbers. So Monday 1, 2, 3 is a valid variable name. And lastly, variable name can contain some special characters such as the underscore. So speed underscore velocity, this is a valid variable name. So just to recap, as I said before, variables are very powerful. They are a way for us to basically assign values to a name, and then when we want those values in our program, we can simply reference them by name. And remember, the type of the variable is always the same as the type of the value being stored in it. And there are certain restrictions that are placed on the name of variables. So for example, keywords, Python keywords cannot be a variable name. Variables cannot begin with a number, but variables can contain numbers and they can contain certain special characters. And one final thing to note when creating your variable name is that it is good practice to basically make the name of the variable relate to the value that is being stored in it. So for example, we have the name pi and the value being stored in it is the actual numerical value for pi. So that's a good reference. But we wouldn't want to say create a variable called man and then inside of man we're gonna store the value of pi. Like, that's not good practice. If we do create a variable called man, the best value we could put in it is probably the name of a man, such as Bob, right? So that would be a good practice. So when creating variable name, always remember to basically let the name kind of relate to the value that's being stored in it. So it makes your code a bit easier to be understood by yourself and other programmers. So thank you for watching. I hope you learned a bit more about variables in this video. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe. And if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. And once again, thank you for watching.